On December 26, 2021, we awoke to the news that Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa had died. Desmond Tutu was an Anglican Archbishop of South Africa, but he was an Archbishop for the world. The world is old now, but has not known how many giants as Desmond Tutu was. He was a giant among giants, an icon among icons, and he was a man who brought simplicity to his office because he cared about the human cause, and he served that cause in ways that were clearly impeccable. Archbishop Desmond Tutu was a man who was humble beyond words. He was a man who was extremely brilliant, extremely forgiving, passionate about humanity, passionate about the God that he served. As we want to do as human beings, even his death now brings so many words and reminds us of so many words that he spoke. But what should not be lost in those words is that he was a man who lived the words that he spoke. And by so doing, he has left us so many examples that if we are serious, ought to follow to make our world a better place. Some of his words, if they were said by someone else, would be considered controversial. But the words that he spoke were known to be truthful and therefore not considered controversial because, one, there were things that we could see and relate to and replete with evidence all around us. But in addition to that, he was known as a man of truth, with the ability to navigate our worlds in a manner that was loving, kind, direct, and yes, truthful. I think of his words, and I know that some of the words that I remember very clearly that stick with me, those words which he spoke about our role to fight social injustice. And in one of those statements, he said that if in the face of injustice, we choose to do nothing and we choose to be silent, that choice in itself is speech. Because by choosing to be silent, you have chosen to be on the side of your oppressor. So by your silence, you have actually spoken, and you have spoken for oppression. You have spoken for the side of the oppressor, and that is where you stand. So you have spoken, you stand. Another time he actually said, my God is a loving God, and I will rather go to hell than to be one who serves a homophobic God, because my God loves everyone. That is that's a far cry from what we hear from so many Christians who believe that they have a monopoly to this God, who Desmond Tutu actually said in his book was not a Christian. He said God is not a Christian, because God is bigger than any one religion. And he was a priest, a Christian archbishop. But he came from the tradition of the Anglican Church, where love was the guide, where love and kindness, compassion, caring for the underprivileged and the vulnerable among us, and taking care of the poor and the widowed among us, really were the guiding principles of Christianity in that tradition. He believed it until the end. He believed that we must be united, that we must care about one another. So Because of that, he fought for apartheid and brought freedom to Black people in South Africa. But despite centuries of injustice that Black people, his own people, suffered in South Africa, Desmond Tutu pushed for what was called, pushed for reconciliation. And thanks to him, the Truth and Reconciliation Committee was established. And he made it known that it was not about vengeance. Everyone was South African, even those who had committed gross injustices that will forever live in infamy. He was a man who knew how to forgive, a man who knew how to throw his arms around people and love people. He was a man who sat with kings and queens and sat in kings' courts and palaces around the world, but still had a touch that a common man needed and provided that touch. So what I think we ought to do is to actually remember his legacy and live it. Live his legacy so that our world will be a better place, a united place, and one that cares about people, one that fights against any kind of social injustice. Desmond Tutu is gone, but his legacy will live forever. And of course, his books are there to tell the stories about the things that he believed. And history has recorded the work of Desmond Tutu and will continue to record it. He was a just man, and thank God, he has left us his legacy to abide by. And it is my hope that those of us who wish to become better people and make the world a better place would actually try our best to follow that legacy and live the examples that he taught us. So in honor of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, what I decided to do was to invite some people that I know very well to come and share some words, just brief tributes to the man, Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
Good afternoon. This tribute is to Dr. Desmond Tutu, who we lost recently. Interestingly enough, at this joyous moment of celebrating Christ, but we also need to take some time to celebrate Desmond Tutu. Celebrating him is more of a lesson for Africans and the world in terms of his contribution. He's a theologian, and I think a lot of African religious leaders need to step back and take a note in terms of the kinds of accomplishments of Desmond Tutu in comparison with the kind Christianity truly represents. What Christianity truly, truly represents. Because we can still achieve through Christianity a lot of the major roadblocks and be more accepting of each other. And use that level of acceptance and consensus buildings in terms of achievement. This whole notion in terms of to be Christian is to be anti-gay is one of the things that you need to go back and look at in regards to how Desmond Tutu was successful in terms of challenging all of these major institutions. So today is more of a reflection and a study of Desmond Tutu, and in terms of appreciating this little big man who has done a whole lot more for Africa than we can say in terms of a lot of Africanist and politicians and leaders from the continent. Much appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ohiro, for this opportunity to speak regarding the loss of Archbishop Tutu, our brother and our friend. He was a great leader and liberator of injustices. He has demonstrated and modeled how we all individually and collectively can pick up our own torches and become activists to dismantle injustice everywhere. He has modeled love and compassion, his willingness to stand, and not just stand, but to take a stand against opposition, to support others and love others. He's placed himself in the middle of sacrifice for those he saw in a battle of a fight of an injustice across nations and continental struggles. It is an honor that we get to stand on the shoulders of giants like Archbishop Tutu. I'm forever grateful and indebted to his sacrifice, love, and compassion, and commitment to fighting injustice everywhere.
The world has just lost an icon, Desmond Tutu. Desmond Tutu was a tireless advocate for the oppressed and human rights. He was an apostle of fairness and justice. When I think about the legacy he left behind, I want to break them down into humanity, nonviolence, courage, forgiveness, and simplicity. In terms of nonviolence, all his life, he fought for a society without racial divisions. One remarkable feature of his fight is that he did it in a non-violence way, despite the brutality of the apartheid regime. In terms of courage, he was not frightened to speak the truth and fight despite the vicious nature of the apartheid regime. He was courageous, and he was not cowed by that brutality. And I also want to remember him for the way he conducted himself as the member of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He sought for forgiveness and never wanted revenge. He believed in the diversity of his country. He even cried with the victims, but revenge was not in his dictionary. He never used his position to amass wealth. Compared to our modern day religious leaders, he was not ready to preach the prosperity gospel. Based on his popularity, he would have easily been able to fund and amass a lot of wealth to himself, or even build churches, cathedrals all over the place. But instead, he was focused on putting an end to racial discrimination and speaking truth to power. As we remember Desmond Tutu today, it is my hope that those of us he left behind will be encouraged by his sense of humanity, nonviolence, courage, forgiveness, and simplicity. If we can just take one of these core values that endured, that he fought for all his life, I think we will live in a better world. Adele Desmond Tutu.
The late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, to me, was one of the great Anglicans that ever lived. He was indeed a voice of conscience. He spoke truth, and anytime he spoke, it was very fair. All through his life, he advocated for equality, and he believed that everybody had a right to live. He believed that those who are marginalized, the poor, the needy, and those who are different had the right to be treated equally. His death means a lot, not just to South Africa, but to the entire world. At a time when the world appears to be so divided between what is right and what is wrong, when people appear to treat people that are different in appearances, sexual orientation, and all of that differences that people tend to treat people differently for. This is a time where Archbishop Tutu would really be needed. The world will really miss him. For me, as an Anglican, he did not only reform the Anglican Church with his views, he transformed those views to be so Christ-like. He reminded us, all of us, of the need to follow the teachings, the true teachings of Christ, and he will really be missed. Thank you.
Yes, the world has lost a great sage. Bishop Tutu was not only a clergy, but he was also instrumental in the lifting of apartheid. He was a fair-minded person and seemed to understand the moment much earlier than most people did. His accomplishments go beyond that, though, because not only did he get people involved in the apartheid movement, he also was an honest ombudsman to the process. When he had to chastise blacks, he did chastise blacks. When he had to chastise the whites, he did chastise the whites. But most people know him for the Truth Commission. But I think that is not his only legacy. I think that he remains one of the few people in the world who has managed to do great things and yet remain humble. And he never sang his own song. He just knew what he had to do for South Africa and the world. And I say the world because the entire world benefited from his wisdom and his foresight into great things. The world will miss him. I think on a personal level, I'll always remember the story of the landing of the white folks in South Africa when they handed over Bibles to the locals and asked them to close their eyes and pray. And when they opened their eyes, they had the Bible, and the whites owned the land. And so it is really a metaphor for what has happened in Africa. And we hope that someday we'll have some other people who will continue the movement just like he did. Adieu, Bishop Tutu. We will always miss you.